Hi everyone, welcome back. So what we're going to do today is we're going to integrate a 3D model with a photograph that we can download from Unsplash. And again, I'll show you in Photoshop how easy it is. We can use some post tricks to improve the quality of the image and an output for presentation. Head on to the downloaded folder, right? And in the folder, you have the photograph that I'll be using for today, and then the scene files and the Photoshop files that you can open up to have a look. In the folder itself, there is a Substance Materials folder. This will be the material that we will download from Substance Designer, and I'll show you guys how to do that. The model that we're using today, and if you want to find out more about the 3D scan model, just click on the link and you'll bring you to the downloads site. All right, let's get started. The first thing what we're going to do is to import the 3D model. So go to File, Import 3D Model, and go to the downloaded folder, Project Day 3, right? And go to 3D Model. We're going to choose the 100K model, so it's easier for us to work with. Press F to frame it so you can see it, and also remember to rename it. So I'm just going to call it sculpture. And again, to let it sit on the ground, all we need to do is go to the right hand side of the action tab, make sure you click on sculpture, and then hit sit on the ground. So press F to frame it again. Now it's in frame. So the next thing we need to do is to import the background image for it to sit on. So go to File, Import, and set Image as Background. Okay, and go to the Project Files folder. You'll see that I've included the photograph that I've downloaded from Unsplash. I'll send you guys the link. It's a really good open source photography website that you can use to download textures and photographs. So we're gonna click on it, open. And the next thing what I need you guys to do is to go to the right side and click on Match Image. Choose image size. The lights, we're just gonna have multiple lights, so we can play around the lights here. And make sure you click on Match Camera Perspective and click OK. Awesome. So the next step, what I want you guys to do is to apply a shader or textures onto the sculpture, right? So make sure you click on the sculpture itself and go to File, Import, and click Place Material on Selection. And go into the folder that I've downloaded called Substance Materials. Click on the Substance Material and click Open. So on the right, you can see the parameters of the shader and texture that we've placed on the sculpture. So right now, if you look at the textures, it's kind of huge, right? So what I'm going to do is to repeat it to like say 10. Now I can see the grains of the marbles. It looks better. You can increase it to like 15 if you want. So this is a way for you to adjust the textures procedurally on the sculpture. You might want to play with the rest of the parameters like the colors and the veins colors. It's up to you, but just leave it as default for now. One thing I always like to do is to check on the pivot point. So if I press V and click on the sculpture itself, I just want to make sure that the X, Y, and Z axis, they are correct. So one way to check is to go to Objects, Align to Scene, or press Q. So you see right now there's a bit of slight change because now the objects, what we've done is we've aligned it to the scene, right? Or aligned to object, right? So that way it's easier for us to navigate around or move it around, like y-axis or x-axis. What I'm gonna do is to pose it now and make sure I got the right angle and scale that I want. If you want to scale it up, you can press S, right? But if you press S and you scale it on the x-axis, you can see it's now proportionate. So what we can do is press Shift, and when you scale, it's going to scale X, Y, and Z. That's pretty dope. I like that. And if you want to move it around, you can press E. And rotate, you can press R. So what I'm going to do is I just want to hide the background people. I'm going to press S, Shift, just scale it up a little bit more. Press E, I can move it backwards a little. All right, so now it looks pretty good, like it. And I press R and just want to see which angle fits me better. Okay, I kind of like this view. Perfect. Right now, we're still looking at the preview render. So I'm just going to click on the real-time progressive render and see how it's going to look with the background image and with the lights that's generated for us using the background image. So now what we need to do is to learn how to study the lights. What I'm going to do is to turn off all the other lights and keep the environment light on, so I can double check on individual lights and what they do and how I can further adjust it to light it closer to the background image, right? To integrate it better with the background. So for environment light, if you want, you can intensify it so you can see the effects. Okay. You can even rotate it so you can see where the light is coming from, right? Just observe the shadows. You can see the highlights as well. So it's right here, which is fine. So the next step is go to directional light, the first one. Click on it, right? So make it visible. And now if you want to see it like better, you can increase intensity. And that way you can see the direction of the lights. Gonna rotate it. All right, so the light's coming slightly from this side, right, which represents sort of the ceiling light. So that looks pretty good. And what I'm going to do is to, in terms of the color, I'm going to eye drop the ceiling light color. So there's a slight tint of blue. And I'm going to go to directional light 2, turn on the visibility. And one trick that's really good, if it's really confusing to see where it's coming from, I can change the light to a really dramatic like color, like a bright red or pink. And that, in this way, you can see clearer where the light is coming from. So Dimension has created a light that's kind of a rim light. So it kind of represents light coming from the back of the sculpture. So that's cool. I'm going to study the back of the sculpture. It seems that there's a tint of this bluish green turquoise color. So I'm just going to eyedrop it. Awesome. And now directional light 3, I'm going to turn it on, the visibility on. And again, if I want to see where it's coming from, I can change the color. So it's coming from this area, almost like the right front feel of it. So it's almost like a field light, which is great, right? It seems that there's a window over here. So what we're going to do is, again, I drop a color that's closer to this area of the light. So I'm just going to click on, say, this area. And the next thing is I'm just going to turn off the real-time preview. And now, because what I want to do next is to look at the highlights and of course the shadow as well, and just perfect my directional lights to set it up for final rendering. So the first directional light, if I rotate it, you can see that the highlights will change. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that the highlights accentuating the curves and directional lights too as well. I'm not gonna adjust a lot because I'm still gonna respect Dimension's algorithm. I'm just gonna tweak a little just to enhance the light. I can even adjust the height as well. So you can see the highlights will change based on the lighting angle. And then directional lights 3, same thing. I can just play around the lights and just make sure you accentuate the sculpture. And also remember, you guys can change the shape of the light from circle to square. Right? There's a slight difference on there, and you can even change the size of it. But when you change the size, you can see a huge difference, right? So you can play around with it and find the best adjustments to your liking. Don't make it too different because we still want it to integrate the background. So I'm gonna turn back on the real-time render. Look at the lighting and look at the background sculptures, right? So we're gonna use them as a reference to adjust our light because right now I see that it's super bright, overexposed comparing to the sculptures at the back. So I'm just gonna go to directional light 1 and decrease the intensity of the lights. I'm gonna go to directional light 3 and to decrease the intensity of the lights. We'll go to environment light 1 and just play a bit of the rotation because I still feel that it's slightly dark at the front. I want to reduce the specular highlights on the sculptures. So what I'm going to do is go to sculpture, go to the materials tab, and I'm just going to look at the roughness. So if I have 0 roughness, it's going to be super specular. It's going to be super shiny. So I'm just going to introduce a bit more roughness to it. So now I'm also looking at the references from the sculptures from the photograph, and I'm just looking at the shadow direction, comparing to the shadow direction of our sculpture, right? Just want to make sure that it aligns to the background image from not just the highlights, but also the shadows where it falls. So right now it looks pretty good to me. The shadows look to be in place, just like the background sculpture. I would just tone down the environment light a little, so I just make it 90. So the next thing what I want you guys to do is to look at the reflections, right? So you look at the background, the sculptures, the reflections on the ground. I want to have the same effect on ours as well. So go to Environment tab and go all the way down to the ground plane. You can see that there's reflection opacity. So just turn it all the way up. You can see now there's like gorgeous reflection on it, but of course it looks fake. But again, if you look at it, it represents like the background image. So what we're gonna do is then play with the reflection roughness to make sure there's a little slight blur to it. Awesome, it looks pretty close to the background. And what I'm gonna do is for reflection opacity, I'm just gonna tone it down to about 50. That way it feels like it's sitting on the ground. I like that the highlights is very close to the background image as well. It looks overexposed, but it's supposed to resemble the background. This is how we can integrate our 3D sculptures onto a photograph by observing the photographs that we have. First is to examine the highlights and also the shadows, where it falls and how dark it is. So before we set it off to for rendering and to open up in Photoshop, I want to show you guys how we can download the materials to work with Dimension. So if you go to the top left-hand corner, the plus icon, we can import our content here, but you can go to Substance Source, click on it, and it will bring you to the Substance Assets browser website. You can subscribe to it, you can log into it, and there's also a free assets. Say you like this marble material, you can download from here and import it into Dimension. But one thing that's really cool is before you download it, if you click on the image, it'll bring you to the substance source, right? It will show you the materials and different presets that you can play with in Dimension. But you go to the Substance 3D tab. This is a really cool way to play with the materials before you download them. For example, I can change the textures of it. I can change the colors, the roughness, things that we can do in Dimension, we can do it here as well. And when you're happy with the tweaks that you've done, the custom materials that you have adjusted, you can just download from here and make sure you save it as SAR, right? So this is a substance extension that Dimension will recognize. And then when you download it, you'll be in a folder, and then you can go back to Dimension and choose your sculpture or 3D image, and then go to File, Import, and place material and selection, right? Just like what we did before, you can choose download the material, and then it will appear on your 3D object, and then you can adjust the parameters in Dimension as well. Also, another thing I want to talk about is HDR Image. So we talk a lot about image-based lighting. If you go to Environment tab right here, you can see that this is the image, but if you go to Environment Light, this is a 360 image that's generated by Dimension. It is not really accurate in terms of the real world because it's a duplicate of the front image to the back. But if you go to the folder here, you can import real HDRs into your environment and then light it from there, from an EXR or HDR image. So how do you do that? There are quite a number of websites that allow you to download professionally taken photographs or 360 environment, not just an image, but a 32-bit image. And you can use those images to light your scenes as well. And these are all physically accurate. So I'll send you guys the link to it that you can download for free, and you can use them for your projects as well. And if you prefer to do studio lighting, there are also applications for you to do it in the software. So let me know if you guys are interested to know more about HDR lighting, because I'm a big fan of it, and I can do a next series of tutorials focusing on HDR lighting. So let's get back to our rendering. Now that we've done our lighting, we've set up our lights, we've tried to adjust our lights to match our background, we've learned how to match the perspective in Dimension. So before we set out for rendering, I just want to show you some things that you need to take note of. So this resolution is great, but when you set out for rendering, it might take a lot of time. So click on the settings on the right corner. The first thing I want you guys to do is to set up to 300 DPIs so we can use it for print, and also the canvas size. So right now it's 2400 pixels width. So what I'm gonna do is to set up the constraint proportions and just render it out as 800 width, and it will align, it will have a proportionate scale to the height as well. And I'm gonna hit fit to canvas. So that way we reduce the size of the render, but still keeping the aspect ratio the same. So now that we have set up the canvas size, the resolution, now let's go to the render tab, select the file name that you want to export as, make sure it's on high, PSD, Photoshop 16-bit, choose the directory that I want to save onto, and then hit render. When it's done rendering, just go to the bottom right corner and click Edit in Photoshop. So as admin layers in Photoshop, we have a background image, and we have a rendered image reduce noise, and we also have got the mask layers, and also the depth channel that if we want to use it is there for us. We have a quite accurate representation of the lighting scenarios, that the reflections look really, really good. We have the backlight, and the exposure looks very close to the background image. So what I'm going to do next is to introduce a little bit of depth of field to the overall image, and then add a little noise to simulate like a ISO 400 film grain. So first thing first, I will go to depth information and make sure I go into exposure and make sure it's on top of the depth channel. in exposure, I'm just gonna bring down my camera. And then go to channels, go to my blue channel, right click duplicate channel, and click depth. Sweet. And go back to RGB channel and go back to layers. Well, next I'm gonna turn off the visibility of my depth channel. And what I'm gonna do next is to group my background image and my rendered image as a raw group. And press Alt, duplicate the group. And then in this group, what I'm gonna do is to collapse it, to merge it. So I'm gonna hit merge group and then rename it to final image. Great. So the next thing I want to introduce the Z depth onto the overall image. So I'm just gonna go to filter, blur, and click on lens blur, right? And lens blur will choose the depth channel, and I'm gonna set my focal point to the face. And just to make sure it works on the image, I'm gonna increase the radius just to double check it. Yep, the focus on the face, everything's blurred out. And what I love about the depth channel, it is not just on the image itself, it's affecting the background image as well. So it looks more cohesive. So next thing I'm gonna do is to reduce the radius to 10. Still a little bit too much. Just gonna go to 8. And I'm gonna reset my focal point just to make sure it works. And I'm gonna turn on and off the preview mode just to make sure that the effect is also on my background as well. So I'm gonna reduce it to about 5. And I will change my shape of my iris to triangle and click OK. So now let's compare the image, the raw layers, and the final image with the depth of field applied to. Perfect. So the next thing before we wrap it up, I want to press on the raw group and press Shift and press Alt to duplicate them. Right, so now we have the raw copy and the final image copy. And I'm just gonna right click on it and merge layers. So now I got this final image copy that I'll use to introduce a slight film grain to simulate sort of like a film ISO 400 film grain, because without that it looks too clean, and sometimes we refer that as it looks too computer generated. So what I'm gonna do on the final image copy, I'm just gonna go to filter, noise, add noise. And you can see immediately, you can see the result. The noise makes it easier for the eye to register. So I'm going to press 1 or 1.5. That looks good to me. Click OK. So that's it. This has been a really fun exercise for us. We've learned how to introduce a background image into Dimension. We've learned how to integrate lighting in a 3D scene so that we can adjust the lights to blend it better with the background. We've learned how to compare reflections and introduce roughness to make it slightly blurry. And we've introduced a slight depth of field and film grain to polish up, to do like a final grade post work for final presentation. Thank you all so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you guys in our next lesson.